Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. We recorded this episode last Wednesday evening, and today is Friday afternoon. And in that time period, we've learned a few things that we kind of need to address because frankly, I'm kind of at a loss for words for some of the things I've learned and heard. In the episode, the first thing that's easy correction, I think, was an unintentional mistake. In the episode, they state that that the Republican Party reached out to the Libertarian Party about this agreement. It's actually the other way around. Hannah Goodman, chair of the Libertarian Party of Colorado, stated that she was actually the one that reached out to the GOP. Fine, that honest mistake, I'm sure. However, there's a second part to this that's really more about the context, and I felt like it was important to actually bring this up at the beginning of this episode and give people context as to what this episode includes. Um, we talk a lot about Dan Ward, the campaign for Dan Ward, who is the congressional candidate in Congressional District 8 in Colorado. He covered the margin of the Republican and Democratic voters by he had 4%, and a lot of the media claimed he swung the ballot from the Republican to the Democrat and gave the Democrat the seat. In this episode, he's described as a line item or a line holder candidate. After reading some of the messages from some of his volunteers, which again, line item candidates don't have volunteers, but he had a PR director. He was attending campaign events with other candidates. He was doing podcast interviews as the congressional candidate for the Libertarian Party. That's not a line holder candidate. So I'm kind of struggling here as to why board members of the Libertarian Party of Colorado would describe him as a line holder candidate. That doesn't make any sense to me. The other thing is, not only do it's one thing to come onto our podcast and we're going to have Libertarian Party members. It's one thing to describe a candidate on our show as a line holder candidate. It's a reality in the LP that there are line holder candidates. But not only have they described him as a line holder candidate on our show incorrectly, they described him to the media as a line holder candidate. The comms director the Denver Post reached out to the comms director to try to reach Dan's campaign and get a statement. And the comms director of the Libertarian Party of Colorado said he's just a line holder candidate. And that's how he's quoted in the newspaper. So anyone who reads that article is going to think, well, I guess all Libertarian candidates are just line holder candidates. The other thing is, the board of Colorado knew he had a PR director. They knew because on November 14th, right after the election, on November 14th, that PR director was in front of their board saying, I'm the PR director for Dan Ward. And to say a month later, when the Libertarian Party of Colorado was reached out to by the Denver Post to then tell the Denver Post he's just a paper candidate, instead of sending the Denver Post to that PR director, I'm frankly at a complete loss for words. I hope that this is mere incompetence and not maliciousness. I don't know what's going on. We've also learned some other things that are frankly really disturbing because you've got board members openly talking about fraud, defrauding donors. We're going to get to the bottom of a lot of this. The plan now is we're going to send an email to the board of the Libertarian Party of Colorado detailing all of these things that we want to talk to them about because there's a laundry list of them. And we're going to see if they'll come back on and talk to us about it. Because frankly, we need to get to the bottom of this. Members of the Libertarian Party of Colorado need to know what's going on in their own party. And frankly, right now they don't. Especially surrounding this deal around the GOP. The fact that they might be sabotaging Libertarian Party candidates completely colors and makes completely clear what the objective of the agreement with the GOP is. So we need to get to the bottom of this. We need to figure out if they are, in fact, trying to sabotage Libertarian Party candidates. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Hopefully it'll be soon. We're going to leave this episode up because it does, in fact, deal with the agreement. It shows why it's a bad idea for pretty much every party in every Libertarian state affiliate. Because it's not going to work out for liberty in the long run, because I don't think that there is any path to liberty through the duopoly. But there's a lot of other questions surrounding the context of this video, around the context of the agreement that we frankly have to get to the bottom of. So we're going to work on that. We'll figure it out. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Classical Liberal Project, the official podcast of the Classical Liberal Caucus. Today we have a really great, fun episode in store for you. Should be a great conversation. I'm joined today, as usual, by the chair of the CLC, Jonathan Casey.
Hello.
Good afternoon. And thankfully, two individuals from the Libertarian Party of Colorado, the secretary of the Libertarian Party of Colorado, Andy Bukovich. Andy, thanks for making time for us.
Of course.
And the communications director of the Libertarian Party of Colorado, Jordan Marinovich. Thank you for joining us, sir. It's a pleasure talking to you. So the purpose of the podcast today, at least what we wanted to discuss, or at least to kick us off and talk, give the audience some broad context on what we're discussing. Last month, a post that you guys did went viral. It made the rounds. I think there was over 1 million views on the post that went out talking about an agreement that the Libertarian Party of Colorado made with the Libertarian Party of Colorado. And it's a relatively new concept. I think you guys are one of the few states that have tried this, where you guys partner with the GOP to say, stand out of races where you can maybe promote a liberty-minded candidate, I think was the way that the framing was worded on the statement. Many of our viewers are probably going to be familiar with that, what that agreement. And so what we wanted to do is have a broad conversation about the agreement, kind of what led to it, and just learn more about, the reasoning behind it, how it works, and what set up. So, Jonathan, I don't know if I missed anything, but
no, I would kind of like to make sure that we're clear on exactly what the agreement is, what it isn't, how it would work out. So I'd like to kind of hear from you guys, explain it in your own words, because it's, a lot of rumors flying around about what it might mean, all that. So I'd be curious as to hear your guys's, tell everybody what it actually is.
Yeah, and Jordan or Andy, I don't know if he wants to kick off, but I was thinking a good place to start would be like, what made you guys think, what led to it? Like what kicked off the idea and started the whole ball rolling?
And if you want to let me do the history of kind of how we got here, and then if you want to go over the actual agreement itself. So we got to rewind it back to the previous voting cycle that we had. And this was a pre-takeover of the National Party. The Libertarian Party kind of had its own little mini takeover where Andy and I and a bunch of people, me personally, had just gotten involved in party politics. I had been part of the Liberty movement, for a number of years, but saw this opportunity to get involved in party politics with the Mises Caucus. And at convention, it was kind of an open thing where we got to the point of the convention where they asked who wants to run, and it was kind of just like a hand raise kind of thing. Like, I live there, I'll do it. And then it was kind of either NOTA or let the person run. And the kind of the standard procedure at that time was line holders, right? If you want to run, whether you want to run a campaign or not, it's better to have our name on the ticket than not, that kind of thinking of things. So a man named Dan Ward in CD8 put up his hand, and he went and ran. But he was a line holder, right? He didn't run a campaign. I think he went to one state fair once. And when the results came out of CD8 and he had won 5% of the vote, he was kind of a surprise, to say the least, that this all happened. He woke up the next day and to see what had happened, and he got that many votes. So that's really what led us to where we are today with the Colorado GOP reaching out to us. And really, it came down to the fact that we didn't even try, and that was the margin of error, way beyond the margin of error, to quote unquote spoil that race. And we never intended, I guess previously, to spoil anything. We didn't do it intentionally. It's just somebody was part of the party and wanted to run in that district and were able to, that we just go or not. No one's stopping you. No one's going to run against you in the party. So as new leadership came into the GOP and LPCO, that's how they kind of came to this agreement where the chairman reached out to Hannah and was like, look, we can't, as the GOP, we can't have this happen anymore. What can we do to kind of, see what we could do to change this around? So really, it was kind of, we fell into this type of scenario, and it came down to, are we going to leverage this power or thing that we have now to our best advantage, or are we going to do something else with it? So that's kind of the history. I think that's very important to understand where we got to at this point. And that's where we are sitting now. So Andy, if you want to kind of take it from there.
Yeah, and I remember Dan. I remember hearing about him because he got some press. I remember he got a good amount of press. There's a lot of attention on that race. Well, that was early, like the last midterms, right? 2022.
Who did he run against? I'm trying to remember. You guys know?
Barb Kirkmeyer, and I forget who the Democrat was.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry to cut you off, Andy. I just want to make sure I got the timeline right.
All good. Yeah, so the way this thing pretty much works is that Hannah, our chair, and Dave Williams, the chair of the Colorado GOP, sent mutual letters. So we don't actually have the authority of the board as the board to just unilaterally say we're not going to run candidates. What we do have is the ability to set party priorities, political strategy, and encourage delegates to vote a certain way. So just a little background. The context of the agreement is basically that the LPCO will not put up candidates in federal and state level races where the GOP puts up a candidate that meets criteria that we have determined. In exchange, these local races, which is the new strategy for the party that we've been focusing on, where we're putting most of our resources, they're not going to run anybody against us so that we can have a two-way race in most of these races. People say, oh, these are nonpartisan races. There's not really any parties involved. If you're paying attention to politics at all, that's nonsense. There's whole ecosystems that get put behind these nonpartisan candidates to get them access to the same materials, the same resources. So that's the deal. It just basically these races that we've determined strategically for the LP are not very important for us building a movement and building a party. We're just going to stay out of, and the things we actually care about, the path is clear. So if the goal is liberty, both sides are benefiting, and only in a way if the libertarian criteria has been sufficiently met. And just a little bit more of the history there and how this kind of came to be. All credit to Hannah, our chair, for pushing the ball forward on this. But this type of thing of using the Libertarian Party as a weapon to fight for the liberty movement instead of trying to advance the interests of the party as such has always been. I've been a Mises organizer since 2019, and every person that I've brought into the party or have talked to as they've onboarded and things like that, this has always been the stated goal. So I think our delegation and our movement is really behind Hannah as well, and she's kind of executing on the will of the people who put her in that position. So.
Okay, that's interesting. That's good context, a very good context. One of the things I think Jonathan wanted to talk a bit about the criteria, because that's honestly where our biggest questions rise, where like, what exactly is that criteria and how's that defined? And I think that's where a lot of the stuff got lost on Twitter, right? It's like what that criteria is. But I am interested in what you said a second ago about the Mises Caucus strategy. Do you feel like this is one of the first states where you're kind of pioneering out the Mises strategy here of like using the party in this kind of, I would say it's a non-traditional way. I think there have been other parties that have done this in the past, but this is kind of new, at least in our recent history.
Well, and I've got a few examples of it, something similar happening, but I do want to hear what
would you say that you guys are, is that kind of where you're at in your head here? You're trying to pioneer the new strategy and see how it works?
So I don't think that like this strategy specifically of make deals with the minor party to attack the party that's more of a threat to liberty in your state was specifically on the table.
Okay.
More the general concept of if there's an action that it might not be the best thing for the Libertarian Party as an organization, but it is more likely to advance liberty forward in your locality, you should pursue that end instead of the end that is just good for the party. And I think, yes, we are one of the first Mises states that have seen this opportunity to do something like this and pursued it. So,
got it. Okay.
And,
well, that's good.
And I want to say, it's not a Mises cult, right? Like we have a lot of discussions internally, and there's a lot of people that are in the caucus that really disagree with what we're trying to do here. But you got to take it into context, right? If you take a New Hampshire Libertarian from the Mises Caucus, they're probably going to hate this, but they have much more control and power in New Hampshire, or a Mises Caucus member in Florida, where the Republican Party is the one in power mostly, and they're the big dog to take down. So the context of the state, and the political environment really matters in this case. And yeah, so it came down to, you know, this opportunity was given to us through fate and chance, from a guy who he's not involved with the party anymore, strangely enough, to come down to a decision. So to Andy's point, definitely not part of the plan, because, you know, this wasn't really foreseen, but the stars aligned in this case.
Okay, got it. That makes sense to me. All right, I have one question before I hand it to Jonathan, because I feel like I'm on a soapbox for a while. But I'm curious, the criteria, like that was the first thing I think we were curious about. Was you said liberty? I think in the document it said liberty-minded, anti-establishment. Were there more nuance to the criteria behind the scenes? Like, how do you guys see the criteria for this?
Yeah, so we are, we have, I don't know if we made it public yet, but there is a candidate commitment type of pledge that we're drafting and going to send over to the GOP, which basically, you know, that this is kind of our list of demands, right? That a candidate has to pledge that they're going to agree with XYZ to get our agreement not to spoil the race. So that's kind of the first step that we've gone on to is to draft this. We've been working on it internally and with party members, again, to curry their favor, to make sure that this plan can go through, and they really do agree with not running a candidate in a certain race. That you know, we're involving everyone in the party. This is not, you know, some behind the green curtain type of deal. We're very involved with our members, so we've drafted that agreement. You know, I don't know if it's public just yet, but it will be soon. And I mean, it's something that every libertarian can get behind. You know, like reducing, you know, don't vote for any tax increases. In Colorado specifically, you will do everything in your power to protect Tabor, our taxpayer bill of rights, where, you know, the excess of any income tax brought in has to be refunded to the public. So that's the types of things we're working on. Andy, I don't know if there's anything else that we can add.
Yeah, that's our process that we're hammering out for candidates who have not held office before, which I think is the tricky case that people are worried about. Where it's a lot easier is someone who's already in office making that determination. There's a great organization in Colorado called Free State Colorado that puts out a Liberty scorecard. And basically, if you're not getting an A on there, you're getting somebody run against you.
Gotcha. So that was going to be one of my questions was, you know, I mean, obviously with GOP candidates on the campaign trail, they can often sound like libertarian or libertarian light. You know, how do you hold them to it? So are there any current candidates that you look at and go, you know, GOP candidates that you currently look at and go, or elected officials that you look at and go, yes, that's somebody we won't run against? Is there anybody out there right now that you can say, yep, that's a name we wouldn't run against?
I mean, that's the point I was going to bring up is, you guys with Amash, like if there was an Amash in Colorado and he was running as a GOP and we could literally decide whether he won or not, would we make the conscious decision to make him lose, or a Rand Paul or a Thomas Massey? That's the scenario that's very likely ahead of us. And well, that is the reality in some of these races like CDA. Whether we run or not, we choose which party wins. So yeah, like if a Justin Amash, you know, runs in CD8 under GOP, we're going to choose, you know, everything we can do to not spoil his race. But if they throw up another Kirkmeyer again, it's, you know, it's down in the dumps.
I think that's an interesting narrative. You know, I've heard that a couple times, and I think there's an element that I agree with, but there's also an element that I disagree with. One of the ways that I look at the whole thing, and I think the Amash analogy is actually a really good one because it is an example of somebody who's like very politically aligned with the platform, right? He was a Republican for years before he joined the Libertarian Party. The way that I always see it is it's about leverage. And I almost think, and again, I don't know the dynamic as much as you guys do with Dan Ward, but I almost think Dan Ward, anecdotally, from what I've seen on the articles I've read about him, serves as a good example of this. One of the things that I don't personally like to hear from other GOP candidates or Republicans or Democrats is their libertarian candidate spoils races. And I know that tactically speaking, I think we all agree that, yeah, there are some swing voters and the Libertarian Party can kind of affect those people. But I think the narrative of spoil races inherently kind of says there's a small pool here and you've got to, get these people to choose one side or the other, and they ignore the bulk of libertarian leaning, classical liberal voters that would have never participated in the election if they didn't have an option. But I think the Amash example is a good one, because when you run a candidate, like say against Amash in a race that's competitive, you can actually force an Amash to adopt more libertarian stances, because those voters, say those swing voters or the libertarian voters that wouldn't participate to begin with, are going to vote for Amash if he adopts the values. But if you have an alternative on the ballot, it kind of forces him to adopt the values. That's the way, and that's where I think our disagreement comes to. That's the way I see it, is if the alternative isn't there, there's really no threat of not adopting the values. And
I think there's an assumption baked in there that is actually one of the biggest problems the party faces historically, which is that people are ticking the L box because they agree with the libertarian candidate or actually want to see libertarian ideas. I would contend that nobody really knows to what degree people are actually inspired by libertarian candidates and thus voting L, or they see a third box and are voting that way. If it is just that they're seeing a third box, which when you look at the average involvement in politics and knowledge of the typical American voter, I would bet that many people historically have just been checking that third box. This is a way of weaponizing that third box, which I know there's been a lot of people don't like that term spoiler, right? When you're a candidate that has not run any campaign, nobody knows who you are. You're not even really representing the ideology of libertarianism very well, and you still get this decent chunk of the votes. It's hard not to view that as a spoiler. We can either pretend that that's not the case, or we can weaponize that, which I think we're doing in Colorado.
Are you saying Dan Ward wasn't representing libertarianism very well?
No.
I didn't mean to make a comment about him, but I will say, like, from what I can tell, that dude doesn't even believe in property rights. So
yeah, he was previous to this, he was a member of the Green Party, and when we initially pushed back against the spoiler label before all of this GOP stuff happened with the press, is that's exactly what I said to CPR and some of these other folks that got comment from us, is he's a leftist. Who's to say that he didn't pull as many votes from the Democrat as he did from the Republican? And so to say he was a spoiler for the Republicans is an assumption that you're making. When really as soon as we took over, he was out the door before his campaign was over, because he's a pretty hardcore leftist. So yeah.
Okay, so that you mentioned pulling from votes from left or right. Most of the studies that I've seen show that most libertarian voters probably wouldn't even go to the polls at all to vote if there wasn't a libertarian on the ballot. So aren't you telling those voters stay home?
In these races, we're saying if you want to see libertarian values enacted, vote for the R.
Isn't that an endorsement of the Republicans, though?
No, it's not.
And you're telling them to vote for the Republicans. That's not an endorsement.
We're not telling them anything. We are saying that if you don't see an L on the ballot, there is a good chance that the person there is going to align with your interests and might actually get elected. Another thing I wanted to bring up real quick that I've seen tossed around as a criticism of this, and it kind of correlated to this point, is that are we going to prevent good libertarians from running, right? What if there's somebody who really wants to run for a race? They're the most ideologically pure libertarian you could ever imagine. They're a really effective communicator. Are you going to keep that person out of the race? To that, I would say we have way more city council spots than we can actually fill. You are much more elected to get elected to one of those spots. We've already gotten a mayor elected in Colorado. We would much rather see a talented, motivated person like that run for one of these races and start their political career than run this PR campaign that's ultimately not going to achieve any political result.
Okay, well, that's an interesting concept. So I can relate to a lot of the sentiment behind that too, because when I was the chair of the Libertarian Party of Tennessee, by the way, I think, just want to throw this out there before I get to my point. Libertarian Party of Tennessee is almost in an opposite situation to you guys. We have a Republican supermajority and they run everything. Like they have a constitutional majority. And and we have no ballot access, so we can't even get on the ballot. It's like 45,000 signatures to get on the ballot.
We're blessed in that regard.
Yeah, you guys definitely have a better dynamic there. So for that. And one of the things I said when I was state chair was run for those local races, those dynamics you can shift. But I think that the key, the one thing that I wanted to lean into what Jonathan was saying, like, let's say you guys do find somebody who's and this is a hypothetical, but you have a very passionate, motivated, well-spoken individual that wants to seek a higher rate, like a state Senate race or a state rep race. And they decide, okay, guys, listen, Andy, I disagree with you. I disagree with you, Jordan. I want to do this. I don't want to run for local race. But they're challenging somebody that may fit your criteria. I think that's the real question that we have, because we look at it from the outside. I mean, we're the minority caucus in the party. But what if we have a candidate that's like very passionate about challenging the GOP on the issues that they're bad about, like gun control, or as you guys, I mean, again, talking anecdotally, like taxes. I mean, they can be pretty bad on taxes. They just passed a gas tax in Tennessee. The Republican supermajority did. If we had a CLC candidate that say wanted to step up and run for a state rep and challenge that to try to push that person, how would you guys deal with that conflict or that dynamic if they say challenge that established agreement that you have?
Yeah, if we got a candidate like you were describing in the same race with one of the GOP that we have that passes criteria, that comes down to what Andy talked about at the beginning. Is that's up to the delegation at that point. We as the party leadership, we have our strategy and we have our suggestion, but the delegation, it has the ultimate say on things. So yeah, at that point we would leave it up to the delegation to say,
so
like,
it's
hey,
like a strong recommendation then to the
right.
delegation. Okay, so you guys do nomination all at convention when you guys,
I mean, if our party who put us all in these positions to be on this stage right now to represent them mutinied and said, we're not doing this anymore, there's literally nothing we can do about it. So it would be up to that candidate to say, like, look, like, delegation, that I want to run for this. I know we have this agreement, but I think I'll be even better than that person. But our contention would be, like, you talk about splitting the vote. If you got two candidates, GOP and Libertarian, that are both essentially ideologically the same, you're guaranteeing that Democrat to win either way. So we'd have to come to some type of agreement, or we're going to sink both ships.
I've got two questions here, but I want to start with the practicality of it. You guys nominate, I think, 72 days before the GOP does. So let's say there's a person running for the GOP nomination, and you guys have decided that that's the candidate you prefer. So you decide you nominate no one to run in that race. And 72 days later, the GOP candidate you preferred loses. Well, now you don't have a candidate in the race. What do you do then? Do you just not have a candidate in that race?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, but that's what it comes down to with our agreement with the GOP. Is at that point, I would imagine it's a kind of a backstab, right? They have control over their party just like we do to a large extent. And if there's a bait and switch, then that's what we have to consider moving forward. But they know that we didn't even try in CD8 and we jacked them up. So moving forward, if they burn that bridge and it's all right, gloves are off, then the gloves are going to be off. But that's what we talk about with libertarians, is incentivizing human behavior, right? That all the incentive is in them to stick to this agreement. Like there's no upside for them stabbing us in the back in this. But I think to your point, Jonathan, is like, what if their delegation, mutinies against them and gives this other person in there? And, that's the type of scenario we're going to have to come up against. But to Andy's point, there's so many more open slots than there are candidates that are stepping forward to go into those slots at this point. It's really something that, the upside to this, I think, is is so great to not have to try to make this work. Imagine if we get an Amash coming out of Colorado and we get a couple more libertarians in the local, and then that next cycle falls over that next cycle. So I understand all of the concerns and criticisms, but also think about the upside of this and, like, what if it works? Like, how huge that will be for all of us in the long run.
Well, but let's talk about long-term strategy for the Libertarian Party of Colorado. Because if you don't run candidates on ballot, you become irrelevant. I mean, isn't that the case? Because if you don't have candidates on the ballot showing that you're actually relevant in politics, the voters are willing to vote for you, where's your power? Where's it gone to? Because, like, you're saying you want to run local candidates, and I'm all for running local candidates, but if you aren't running people for partisan races, your name recognition is gone. You're not getting in front of voters. You're not having those people in front of voters. I'm all for running candidates in every single race, all the time, everywhere, because that's how you get people. That's how you get libertarians in front of voters. And I've seen that in Texas, where we've gone out, we have local candidates go out and they talk to their communities and they get in front of voters and talk to voters, and voters realize, okay, libertarians aren't these crazy right wingers. They actually understand what's going on. They have real world ideas. So to me, it feels like you're selling yourself short in the long term, because you're not getting as many people in front of voters as you could be. I understand you want to focus on local races, but if you don't have anybody, running for the partisan races, you're kind of selling yourself short, aren't you?
I think, can I help on that one, Jordan? 3 things there. One, there are some people that you do not want to be the first thing they Google when they hear about libertarianism. So there are some people that you can elect as line holders who end up not creating a website, not doing any real work. The 1 or 2 times they get talked to by anybody, they don't give great answers on anything. Your brand is actually hurt by having those people. So even totally absent this strategy, the LP would do well to be more selective with the people it puts on the ballot. Secondly, it's very unlikely that the Republican Party puts up enough good candidates that we're not running any state level races. If that happens, then incredible. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We've made major strides, but that's not the state of the GOP in Colorado. Thirdly, we have never, as far as I can tell, the Libertarian Party of Colorado has never been more politically relevant than now that we actually have someone in local office who's able to generate headlines and nullify tyrannical state power. If we can build a coalition of people like this that the electorate knows are libertarians, it actually builds the kind of credibility that it takes to elect people in these state level races. These state level races are really contentious. There's a lot riding on them. You could deal with a lot of tyranny or enjoy a lot of freedom, depending on how the results of these elections goes. People are very careful with that vote. It's a lot to ask of them to take it on somebody who's most of the time never held an electoral position, doesn't have a lot of experience to justify this. If we can actually build these networks of local people, that can turn into a real political movement that gets people elected. And for 50 years, people have been trying to just go directly to these state level races, these partisan races, and it hasn't borne any fruit.
Anecdote real quick. Jonathan, are you okay? I threw something out there. Okay. So I find it interesting that this is the way that, I guess it was Hannah that kind of was the one that kind of initially pushed the ball down the hill on this one. But when I think of an example, like in Tennessee, for example, if I would have had a candidate run in a race, like a statewide race, or even even if it was a city council race, and I had the GOP so frustrated with the outcome of a race that they were calling me to try to broker deals behind the scenes to say, hey, let's get this guy off the ballot next time and we can figure out something to make it work. That almost tells me inherently that my strategy is working. And again, we have the same goal. So like, I'm not going to go out there and say that we're all on opposing sides. I think we all have the same goal. We want to see more liberty. But when you see the old parties start to get concerned and say, you're going to keep me from winning a ballot, you're going to push the needle, that inherently points to an amount of power that the party has. Otherwise, that conversation, that phone call would have never happened. And it goes back to, I think, the leverage thing that we mentioned a second ago. I think that the leverage inherently achieves that, because by being represented, you can get them to adopt those values because they can nullify the guy. And that's, again, assuming you have an actual libertarian on the ballot. Jonathan, I feel like I derailed you.
Well, I want to put one thing I do want to point out is that you could have, until the party itself, until the Republicans or the Democrats, the party themselves start to adopt these values, it's not going to matter how many liberty-minded Republicans you get in office. Like, I'm glad that there are liberty-minded Republicans, but they don't actually affect real change. And I think
there's a reason why Amash had to leave.
Right.
There's a reason why Amash had to leave, right?
Right. So by forcing them, and even if we swing some good libertarians or good Republicans, if we push them out of office, that tells the GOP that our values are actually really good, and that it forces the party itself, and that's what's going to really have to change. Because I'm not somebody who thinks that liberty in our lifetime will ever be achieved through the duopoly. So even if we got a dozen Ron Pauls elected, I don't see that happening. And so I understand that that's what you would like to see happen, but even if that did happen, I don't see that really changing much in the long run. Even if that did happen, even if the best case scenario for this deal works out, I don't see that happening. And I want to make one point. I'll make one point real quick. Going back to, you kind of sounded like you don't really think paper candidates are really worth anything. But in 2012 in Colorado, you guys ran almost a full slate of candidates, and you guys increased party registration by 250% in 2 years. That's a huge jump. So to me, when you're saying you kind of poo-poo the idea of just blind candidates, that tells me that this strategy has worked in the past. Why can't it work now?
Yeah, that's not the party that we walked into, me and Andy. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, it was a handful of people that raised their hands to go onto this, and I got more emails about what I saw this candidate on the ballot. I know they're running. I don't know anything about them. Can you send me a bio? That I got more emails about our candidates about how they didn't have any presence. Versus now, I'm getting emails from Denver Post and all these CPR, asking our opinion on things, asking us to comment about not even this agreement, but the things beyond that. So, we came into a scenario where this line holder strategy really what ended up hurting us more than helping us. Now we're trying to rebuild the party. We're putting systems in place internally to get our mechanisms going. And, maybe we get to a point to where running a full slate of candidates is really going to be advantageous to us again. But I wish we were in that same scenario that we were in 2012 here in Colorado, but that's not what me and Andy walked into. It just wasn't. So I don't know what happened between now and then, but we're here now.
One quick wisecrack too before I respond to a point there. If we are all on the same team and working towards the same things, as Josh says, it would be awesome if you guys didn't call for our disaffiliation before ever talking to us about this. But the comment about in 2012 we did X and then Y happened. I see this kind of analysis in the party all the time, and it's helpful to make arguments about what might work, right? But when we're saying like, oh, we did this and then it led to this, it was kind of related to the thing I said earlier, where the LP has no idea to what degree it's earning things versus things are just happening to it. And this is the kind of same thing. Ron Paul was in 2012. Gary Johnson was in 2012 and 2016. Gary Johnson's 2012 race brought more people into the party than any presidential candidate before. So there's like these other things that are going along at the same time that it's really hard to isolate these big trends to single variable analyses, especially when the party doesn't collect very good data to be able to take a look at.
And to address the other point you made as well. First of all, I just want to say, even though we're halfway through this, or we're actually almost towards the end here, I appreciate you guys sitting down and talking to us. A lot of times people won't do that. We both, Jonathan and I really appreciate that. And to address the commentary on the board's decision on disaffiliation, I want to just make it clear, and not to speak for Jonathan, for the rest of the board, but out of the deliberations that kind of came up when we saw this statement, I think Jonathan even agrees with this. We've met individual Republicans and individual Democrats in their respective parties that we think share our values. And I think that we've all met that. I mean, there was an Amash, there was at one point Ron Paul. But when the party is using resources to support the old parties, we think that undermines not only our ability to fundraise, it undermines our candidates, it sells out our candidates. And so we felt like it wasn't very important to make a strong statement against that, because we saw that as a misappropriation of resources. Now, I'm not attack you guys about that personally. I realize you guys have collectively made that decision, but we do see it that way. If I'm going to be transparent, Jonathan, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I'd like to make a point. I mean, the Libertarian Party, I've got the bylaws, your own, the Libertarian Party of Colorado's bylaws state that the purpose of the party is implement and give voice to libertarian principles throughout the state of Colorado by attracting, nominating, and promoting professional, serious candidates for political office. And so I see that as a violation. I see this agreement as a violation of your own bylaws when you say, well, let's keep libertarians off the ballot. So is that not a violation?
That goes, I mean, you just read the bylaw there, and these line holder candidates, they weren't professional.
That's fine, but I'm talking about keeping candidates off the ballot. That's what
and I think the specific language of the bylaws is we can't endorse a candidate that's not in our party. And again, that's not what we're doing. So, Karen Ann, she's a stickler for the rules. We went over it with her. She's been a secretary. She's the LNC secretary. We had some discussions with her about, the wording of the bylaws and everything like that. And it, we're all good there. So I understand, on the basis of a bylaw violation, we could technically be up for a disaffiliation, but it's just obviously our determination that we didn't violate anything there. And yeah, it ultimately, like you said, it's for the liberty to promote liberty in Colorado and across the nation here. So it's not something that is going to be the super widespread thing where we're saying nobody can run, we're not going to run any candidates or anything like that. This is going to be very strategic, very pinpointed, and it is going to be an experiment. But as I mentioned, think of the upside of this. If this works and then it spreads to other states where other GOP or Democrats start to feel this pressure as well, and other states maybe start to implement this, and across the nation, this could be a good thing.
Okay.
Let me ask this question, Josh, because you've got several other corollaries, similar things that have happened with the Libertarian Party. Because in Georgia, they agreed not to run against the Republican governor race in order for the Republicans not to run against another candidate. The Libertarian Party of Massachusetts endorsed Bill Weld for concessions that never panned out. You've got in New York, like in fusion voting, you have where Republicans jump on Libertarian Party. So how is this different than those? Why do you think that this will turn out different than those, which never really panned out for any sort of real world success for liberty?
So
go ahead.
The first thing is the chair of the GOP out here, just in private conversations with him and things I've seen him argue on the floor and stuff, the guy can quote Rothbard. So you might be right. But if there's ever been a Republican to trust that's actually in Republican leadership, this guy makes a pretty strong case for it. The other thing is, even if it doesn't work out, we're not really risking anything, right? The half the point of this is that we the root problem before this, before Dave Williams ever got elected to chair of the GOP and any of this was even on the table, that we were having is that nobody was happy with these line holder candidates. And we realized that we only have so many resources. We have to really direct them towards specific things with a specific plan to try to achieve a specific outcome. So by what criteria do you determine to focus these races, right? Well, one easy criteria is if there's at least lip service being paid that our ends might be achieved in these other arenas, why would we devote any resources there? And that includes human resources, people who are actually capable of running a good race. Like we said, it would be a shame if there was somebody like you mentioned, Josh, who just wasn't convinced of that strategy. But it would be a shame because their talents are just objectively going to be better used if they actually can get into office and are in a position to nullify things than if they just run a PR tour.
But a candidate running a PR tour isn't always a bad thing. In fact, many of our candidates across the country have done really well. Chase Oliver did really well. Donald Rainwater's done really well. You can call them paper, line, whatever you want. They run effective campaigns that have grown the party, that have grown the movement, and put the liberty message out there. How do you know you're not, keeping down one of those style candidates who could break through some of these barriers in some of these larger races? But since it's a small race, they're just kind of, talking to a much smaller audience.
It comes down to whether they run or not. Does it determine the race? That's what this specific example is did Chase Oliver, did him running or not determine whether the Republican or the Democrat won?
Well, I think that actually would be the point that we're trying to make, in essence, is the dynamic that Chase had, his ability to kind of create that runoff and basically be a power broker in that race was the reason why he was able to get so much press. It's honestly the reason why, again, we could talk about Dan's issues, but I think it was the main reason why Dan got so much press and why it was such a big deal, because he had that leverage. And And again, anecdotally, and you guys are going to laugh at me because I know the Mises Caucus always hates when I say this, but like the candidate, like Gary Johnson's what brought me into the party. It was this big he didn't have. I think we all agreed Gary Johnson wasn't going to be president, but the press that he got, the influence that he got, the ability to peel votes off of one side or the other, that drama is really what caused him to get as much press as he did, which was a high watermark for the LP.
I'm not trying to say that there's no value there.
Okay.
What I'm trying to say is that actually getting into office is 99 times out of 100 going to be more valuable, because you can change a lot more minds by making people actually freer than introducing them to good philosophy.
So would inherently almost see that like Ron Paul is a great example of somebody who had a really great platform. If he didn't really pursue that race and challenge the people, I mean, it was the bullhorn that he had that I think made his mess. Like if Ron Paul, I guess where I'm going with this is if Ron Paul ran for city council, I don't think we would all be like, I don't think you two would be. I think you guys are Ron Paul people, right? I remember Ron Paul in 2012 was like the thing that introduced me to the ideas initially. It wasn't the party. But I think if he would have ran for city council, sure, he might have been able to nullify some laws, but it was that bullhorn that he had that I think brought a lot of people to the values. And I think that if you have leverage and you can kind of use it appropriately.
Ron Paul lost his first election or two, I forget.
Yeah, no, of course. He lost several elections.
Yeah. I mean, he ran as Republican, as we all know, but he had that clout of being a long-term, a member of Congress, federal office, and then use that. And I think that's what Andy's trying to get at, right? Is if we get a whole slate over the next 5, 10, 15 years of libertarians that have been, a mayor and city council and county commissioner, and then work our way up, and we have this huge pool of experienced candidates that can then be serious contenders for state and federal office, and then move up. Like that's Jonathan, to your point, that's the long-term strategy here. But in the meantime, what can we do right now to swing that needle? And so we're threading that needle, right? Like I understand y'all's concerns, and I completely agree with everything you guys are saying about what could be the downsides of this for sure. So
okay, I actually only have one more question, and I'm only asking it, and then because I know we're like way over time. I think we were playing for 30 minutes, but I'm only asking this because of me being in Tennessee, where I have like the opposite. So you flip-flopped it, and I'm in Tennessee, where I have a Republican supermajority. I've got to deal with a different dynamic. In a state like Tennessee, in your guys' mind, would it be appropriate for me to like partner with the Democratic Party for a similar outcome? You think it would be a good strategy to use, Andy? I see you nodding your head.
I think it's a lot less likely to be successful because the Democrats, by and large, have been consumed by what I consider to be a really hateful ideology. But if that opportunity is there, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, if there's a Democrat, if you can get the Democrats to run on, drug decriminalization and the stuff that we as libertarians agree with on the Democrats, then go for it for sure.
I'm always surprised how many of the rural Democrats out here are actually kind of liberal. You'd be surprised. It's surprising. I mean, not all of them, but some of them are. Jonathan, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Just one more point on that. Something I don't think a lot of people realize is that Hannah actually sent a very similar letter to the Democrats. There was some wording that was slightly different because in the lead up to the letter, she got absolutely zero response from them, whereas she did from the GOP. But even here in Colorado, if the Democrats were willing to promote more of their, not to give this man any credit as a libertarian, but more Polis type positions of wanting to like get rid of the federal income tax or get rid of the state income tax, Tabor protections, and some of the other things Polis talks a good game about, we would love to do that here with them. It's not likely.
Polis reminds me of a Democrat, Ronald Reagan. Says a lot of really good things, but when you actually dive into it, it's like, and he does a few good things. Like I'll give him a few things. Like he does some good things, but like most of it, and with Ronald Reagan too, most of it you're like, ugh. Like he says some really great things, and he just nails some things. Like he says,
I saw his statement on the.
Speaking of quoting,
you could be so good.
Yeah.
Speaking of quoting Rothbard,
right? I saw that.
Mr. Marinovich bullied him into posting Rothbard a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, he posted a Keynes quote, and then I said like, "Oh, Keynes," and then about like 3 hours later, he quoted Rothbard. I was like, "I'm gonna assume that was me."
There you go. I love it. Oh, that's great.
That is funny. I don't have anything else for you guys. Do you, Jonathan?
No, I think that covers it. We wanted to kind of make sure everyone understood where everyone was at and figure out exactly what this deal was and wasn't. And hopefully people listen to this and kind of get a good sense of where things are at. That's kind of what our goal was from it.
Yeah, and I don't, so if somebody was on the fence or was against this, I don't expect this for somebody to be just all on board of this. But for me and the Libertarian Party of Colorado, all we ask is like just give us a chance to like see this through. And if at the end of this you guys can go, ha, we told you, then we'll admit to that. But like I've been saying, like what if this works? It could be pretty big.
Jordan, you said you joined the LP a couple years ago, right? Like 2 years ago, you said?
Yes.
I was going to say, welcome to the LP, dude. My goodness. The drama is terrible. I'm glad to see that we can like get off of Twitter and have a real conversation. So really enjoyed that a lot. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Anything you guys want to promote that's going on in the Libertarian Party of Colorado before we head out?
Any plugs?
lpcolorado.org/donate, right?
Yeah.
There you
And
go.
LPCO on Twitter.
Right on.
Perfect.
All right, guys. So thanks again. Have a wonderful day and talk soon.